He just shifted to one in Abu Dhabi. And around that time, American embassies had been bombed in Dar es Salaam and Nairobi. The U.S. had responded by bombing targets in Sudan and Afghanistan. And Paul had gone on vacation with a Muslim friend. What Paul didn't know was that this friend had become furiously anti-American. Paul says this friend took out his anger by planting cocaine in Paul's luggage, landing him in prison in Abu Dhabi. Somehow, against all the prison rules, Paul managed to find these small but powerful ways to keep Christmas each year he was locked up. And these celebrations were more than just expressions of religious belief. They actually helped keep Paul alive. And I'll talk with him about that right after the news. I'm Dick Gordon. This is The Story. Christmas, around this time of year, can cause a lot of stress. It is, after all, the most overhyped, over-commercialized holiday on the calendar. But for Paul Sissery, Christmas has a very special meaning. See, he spent 3 years in a Middle Eastern prison known for its disregard of human rights. It was the Al-Wathba prison in Abu Dhabi. It's a dangerous enough place for anyone, but imagine what it would be like if you're Paul, American, Christian, and also gay. Somehow, Paul managed to survive, but also he found ways to celebrate his Christmases in prison, despite all the strict prohibitions against such a Christian rite. I'm Dick Gordon. This is The Story.
The Story is produced by North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC. It's co-produced and distributed by American Public Media.
Paul Sissery will be the first to tell you he's no angel. When he left his job as a teacher at an English language school in Abu Dhabi to go to Greece on vacation with a friend, they got into some pretty serious partying. But it wasn't an easy time. The U.S. had recently bombed targets in Sudan and Afghanistan. Paul's friend was Muslim, and he'd become increasingly anti-American. And to this day, Paul maintains that the man he thought was his friend planted cocaine in his bags. So as bad as times were, things got a lot worse for Paul when he landed at the airport in Abu Dhabi.
When I walked up to the customs agent, he said to me, "Where'd you come from?" And I said, "Well, I came from Athens." He said, "Ah, yes," just like that, and kind of sent a chill up my spine. And I was carrying a black bag, a brown bag, and a green backpack. And he said, "Open your black bag." And I thought, well, okay. So I opened my black bag, and as I was doing so, he said, "No, it's not that one." And I thought, well, there's something strange here. So he said, "It's this one," pointing to my green backpack. And he said, "Open it." I opened it. He said, "Stand aside." And he reached in and pulled out my black toiletries bag. So he was looking for a black bag. And it was one of these oblong bags with a zipper across the top and the ends folded under. And he said, "Open it." And I opened it. And there was a toothbrush and toothpaste. And I said, "That's all there is." And he said, "I'm not so sure." And he reached in under one of the ends. And he pulled out the little glass vial that my friend had the cocaine in. And I was really taken aback, obviously. And he said, "What is this?" And I said, all I could think to say was, "Well, it's just a prescription. You can see it's been used." He said, "I'm not so sure." He took off the lid, put his finger to it, tasted. He said, "This is cocaine. Close your bags and follow me." And that's how it all started.
He knew exactly where to look, didn't he?
Oh, he did. He knew exactly where to look, which bag. It was the black bag, and he was waiting for me. I'd been set up.
Paul, you knew your way around the Middle East at this point. Did you know you were in trouble at that point, or did you think, okay, I can get out of this. I can make the necessary explanations or get the embassy people involved, and this is going to be okay? What were you thinking?
I was just thinking that okay, I'm an American. I know we have a lot of influence over there. They're one of our allies. And I just figured, well, I'll just work through this and they'll get me out of here. And when I was going through the interrogation, it was a strip search, actually. And he tore everything apart. He cut my running shoes looking for more drugs and my waistbands and my pants. And I said, I've got to see a lawyer. I need to talk to the American embassy. And his words were, "You have no rights here." And as I was waiting with him, a policeman showed up, and he put me in shackles and put me in the back of a truck that had a wire cage and drove me downtown and took me to a police station. And it was there that they threw me into this hellhole, if you will. It was a real bad situation of smells and just total filth, just like you might have seen in, movies about things like this in the Middle East.
Paul, was this a police holding cell, or were you in a real prison at this point?
That was a police holding cell.
Okay.
And there I sat for several days. And after about the fourth day, I'd been putting up with all this and all the noise and eating food on a common plate with everybody putting their hands in it. And I guess I just lost it and started screaming at the front gate that I need to see the embassy, because they told me they would have been there by now. But turned out they were all lies about them contacting the embassy. So some policemen came, got me, put me in a white van, drove me down to downtown, and we went to the Sharia court, and they took me in a room before the public prosecutor, where, again, I went into a tirade, and I said, I'm not going to tell you people anything until I get a call to my embassy. And they said, well, you're not going to get a call to your embassy until you give us a statement. So reluctantly, I gave them a statement. They asked me questions, and at the end, they said, you got to sign it. And I looked at it, and it was all in Arabic, and my Arabic was very limited. And I said, I can't. I don't know what you wrote. They said, well, you're not going to get a call. And now it was like 5 days after my arrest. And I said, okay, I'll sign it. They gave me the phone. I had one number I knew was my manager's number. Called it. He was there. I said, I am at the public prosecutor's. He says, we've been looking for you everywhere. Where are you? And I said, public prosecutors, they were charged me with possessing drugs. And he said, oh, my God. So at that point, the door opened. The policeman that took me there came in. They grabbed hold of me. They pulled the phone away from my ear, and they dragged me across the room, put me back in the van, and drove me outside the city out into the desert. And at that point, I did not know where I was, because I'd never been on those roads before. And I just thought, well, this is where they take people to kill them, and no one ever knows what happened to them. And eventually I saw this sign through the front window of the van, and when I saw the sign, it really took me aback. It said Al Wathba Prison. And away in the distance on a hill, I saw this, looked like a fortress. And that's where they took me, and that's where I stayed for the next 33 months. But I just figured, well, this is all going to be over real fast. When the embassy comes, they'll get me out. And when I first saw the embassy, that's when they told me that I was going to be there for at least 7 to 9 months. And that's when the reality really hit home. And they did tell me that the charges were serious. I could get anywhere from 7 to 20 years.
I'm Dick Gordon. You're listening to The Story. I'm talking with Paul Sissery. Paul would eventually spend 3 years at the infamous Al Wathba prison in Abu Dhabi. There's actually a picture of Paul's prison ID card on our website at thestory.org. Somehow, Paul managed to celebrate Christmas each year he was incarcerated. But Christmas was a couple of months away at this point in his story. I asked Paul to describe this place where he was held, and he says from the very first moment he saw Al Wathba prison, it looked like a fortress.
There were turrets at each of the 4 corners, manned by people with machine guns. The walls looked to me like 50 feet high. I'm sure they weren't quite that high. And when the doors finally opened, there was a second wall inside the first wall that was patrolled by policemen with machine guns and dogs. And the one wall, I was told later, was electrified. So it was a prison built by a German firm that no one had ever escaped from.
And did you have your own cell there? What was it like inside?
Well, there were blocks. There were about 10 blocks in the prison. Each one was designed to hold about 85 people. And when I went into my first block, there were over 200 people. They're just rooms, concrete walls over steel, no beds. And you were assigned, when you went into prison, 4 blankets. They took away your clothes. They let you keep a pair of underwear or 2, and they gave you 2 sets of prison garb, and you had to do the best you could. And the overcrowding was such that in our room there were 36 people in a room meant for 6. Oh. And when we put our blankets on the floor, they were overlapping the person next to us. It was that crowded. And where I was, it was open to the elements. The window, there were no screens in the windows or anything. And when I went in there, it was October, which was fairly cool compared to what it was in the summer, like 140 in the summer. And I saw people sitting there just very listless with sores all over them. I say, well, what's this from? And they said, just from the heat. And I thought, well, I'll be out of here by next summer, so I don't have to worry about that. Well, next summer came, and I didn't do very well in the heat, and I got prickly heat, which is little red sores all over my body from ankles to neck. And I got a bit of relief. They put me in the infirmary for about 6 weeks.
How violent was life in that prison? I mean, would the guards beat people? Was your life, were the lives of other people ever at risk?
They were. A lot of the sentences over there, besides being so many years, carried with them caning. And I alluded to the fact that one summer I was put in the infirmary. And one of the, I guess, benefits of being in that place was the window in the infirmary overlooked the central courtyard. And every week, twice a week, that is where they carried out the beatings. And I got to see firsthand how they mercilessly beat people with these canes. Now, beating is a humiliation. It's not supposed to be torture. And these guards are supposed to have the Holy Quran in their armpit. And you would know if they raised their arm too high, that Quran would fall. But these guards did not use the Quran. A person might get a sentence of 40, 120 lashes. And every one of those, they would raise that cane high over their head and come down strong on that person's back or legs. There was no protection over the kidneys, nothing. And I saw men twice my size broken down to tears, who passed out. I saw women being beaten. They passed out. Water was thrown in their face. They'd be revived and the beatings would continue. I saw young boys, 16 to 17, beaten. I saw a man with a cane who could hardly walk. They made him stand up while they beat his legs. And the brutality that I saw there was just foreign to me. I never had seen brutality like that. And I saw people chained up by their wrists so their feet were off the ground for doing nothing more than maybe trying to steal an orange from the kitchen back to the block. And then they would humiliate you by shaving your head. And you may know that in some religions, the hair is very important. And there was one Sikh who they forced him to have his head shaved, and he hung himself that night. It was a horrible thing to see, and to see people, grown men stronger than me, brought down to crying and in pain. It happened all the time. It just showed me another side of humanity I really had not seen before.
Paul Sissery did see more than the brutish side of human nature while he was in prison in Abu Dhabi. While he was there, he met Muslim inmates who actually helped him celebrate Christmas, something for which they could have been severely punished had they been caught. I'll get Paul to describe the 3 Christmases he spent inside that prison in just a moment. I'm Dick Gordon from American Public Media. This is The Story. I'm Dick Gordon. This is The Story. Paul Sissery wrote to me about what it was like for him, as an American, to spend 3 years inside the Al-Wathba prison in Abu Dhabi, a prison infamous for its human rights abuses. And when I was reading his letter, I was struck by the fact that Paul managed to celebrate Christmas each year he was there. He was the only American in the prison at the time. He also happened to be Christian and gay. It was a potentially lethal combination.
Initially, I was put in a block with murderers, child molesters, rapists, drug users, and drug dealers. It was quite a sordid mixture of people. And what really saved me in those early days was that I was a personal trainer before I went to the Middle East, and I was in good shape, and they all wanted to challenge the American to something physical to show that they could do better than me. So we did, contests of push-ups and pull-ups and stuff, and I held my own, and I let them win sometimes so that, they could brag that they'd beat the American. And there were a lot of people there that had been tortured, were broken bones, and people walking with the help of broomsticks.
These are people who were tortured in prison by the prison guards?
In prison and before they were sent to prison, when they were trying to be forced to divulge information.
I mean, what was a greater risk to you? Was it the guards themselves, or was it other inmates? I mean, there must have been some people in there who would have it in for you simply because you were American.
Well, there were. And that ranged from people that just hated Americans per se to, Islamic extremists that were in that prison. And one thing I also had a talent in was massage therapy. And I made a point of helping some of these people that were just in total pain and relieved a lot of it. And because of that, I had people come to me and say, "We will protect you. We will surround you, and nothing will happen to you while you are here."
Paul, you're also a gay man in that prison. Did that ever raise the risk to you? I mean, I would imagine that could be quite dangerous if people knew about it or if people chose to make an issue of it.
When I first entered Wellwathpa prison, on the walk from the front entrance up to where I was going to be put, we walked by a cell right in the middle of the hallway, and in this cell were effeminate gay people. And I just thought, oh my God, that's where they put all the gay people. And because they were subject to taunting, and people, as they walked by, might stick a stick in and poke them and stuff like that. And I just thought, this is not good.
You mean they were specifically there because it was a place where they could be taunted?
Exactly. So when the embassy first came to see me, I made it known to them that I was a gay man and that I did have this fear because of what I'd seen. And they said, "Paul, it shouldn't be a problem. Just be very discreet." And I was discreet. If you had been found out to be gay or have gay sex while you're in prison, it was the norm for them to extend your prison sentence for a couple of years and put you in solitary for some time as well.
Yeah. So you started out in October. What happened the first Christmas that you were there?
Well, the first Christmas, the embassy came a few days before Christmas. Normally, food from the outside was not allowed into the prison, but I guess because of the American cloud over there, they were allowed to bring me some food. And what they brought me were a can of potato chips and a box of cookies and some small pouches of juice. And I decided that what I would do is, rather than just hoard those to myself, I'd share them with everybody on Christmas Eve. So I was able to get them into the block from the kitchen where they'd been put, and crafted a little platter, and we put the potato chips and the cookies on the platter, and we walked from room to room. Everybody took 2 potato chips and 1 cookie. And when we got back to our beginning point, I had about 6 left of each, and I gave them to the foreman of the block. It's always good to keep on good terms with the foreman.
But tell me what was going on, though, in the prison. This is a prison in a Muslim country. Were there people there who resented this kind of public celebration of such an important Christian holiday?
They were just happy to get the cookies and the juice, actually.
And they would tolerate the religious side of it in exchange.
Right. And I never talked about it. I didn't bring up Christmas at all. It was just going to be a non-event for me because I knew to bring it up is proselytizing. And I knew people were in that prison for doing just that on the outside. And you can get stiff sentences for doing that, so you don't talk about it. Yeah. So with my Indian friends, they kind of said, well, we know it's Christmas tomorrow. Let's do something. So I said, let me teach you Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. We started singing that, and they got pretty good at it. And just as we were finishing, I looked outside through the window into the courtyard, and for the first time in all the time I've been in the Middle East, it was totally foggy. And it just raised the hair on the back of my neck that, well, this is really bizarre. But just as that happened, some policemen showed up, and they wanted to know what was going on. And there was a young man in the room, and they grabbed him by the front of his shirt and choked him and almost lifted him off his feet and said, what are you doing here and all this stuff. And they started kicking him, and they took him out of the room and took him out of the block.
Was this because he'd been singing Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer?
It was partly that, and plus the fact that near him was a deck of cards that had been crafted out of box tops from Tide soap that they gave us, because any games were not allowed in the prison whatsoever. So they used that excuse to do this to him.
Do you think in a way, Paul, that they went for him because they were a little bit reluctant to physically assault the American in there?
Exactly. When they came in the room, they started yelling and screaming. And when they turned my way, they saw who I was. And I just stared them down like, what are you doing here? And the man just stopped his ranting and looked at me and like he wanted just to scream at me, but he bit his tongue and just turned away from me and took it out on this young man. So what I had done turned negative for this young man, actually. Yeah. But the Christmases were a way of measuring time. I knew my sentence was 4 years, and over there you get some time off for good behavior, so it would be 3 years. So I knew that first Christmas I would only have 2 more Christmases to go, and then every Christmas thereafter was like one more Christmas, and then the next year I'll be home for Christmas.
So tell me how that second Christmas was different.
The second Christmas was different. By that time, I'd been moved to another block, and it was a bit calmer. In the first block where I was, where no one had gotten their sentence, it was a bit more rowdy and raucous. But once you get your sentence, you kind of calm down. These people had sentences of 15, 20 years. And I got to know that there were about 5 or 6 other Christians in our block. And shortly before Christmas, we talked, and I said, it'd be nice if we could celebrate Christmas somehow. And we talked to the foreman of the block, who kind of liked us. And we said, we'd like to just have a little get-together, maybe sing a song, maybe read a Bible passage. He said, do that. Do that, and we'll protect you, because the guards did not walk inside our block. They were outside the block. And they said, we'll stand guard. If we see any policemen coming, we'll let you know. So you just stop what you're doing. But what we did is...
I'm surprised that they let you have a Bible in there.
Well, the Bibles weren't allowed in the block. My father had sent me a Bible, and he'd had an imam write a note with it. And he made a plea to the warden to let Paul have his Bible. But when the warden got it, he said, no, you can't have it in the block because we don't know what's going to happen when you have the Bible there. So he put it in the library, and it gave me a privilege to go to the library, as small as it was. Only maybe 6 or 7 people in the whole prison of 3,000 had access to the library. So it was while there that I had access to my Bible, and I transcribed some scripture, and we sang a few songs.
What did you sing?
We sang, that first time was like Silent Night. Some of the Christians that were in our little group had been there for 4 or 5 years, and it became very emotional because they had never had anyone to talk to about their religion or even close to celebrating Christmas.
I'm sitting here trying to imagine the sound of half a dozen voices singing Silent Night inside a prison, inside a Muslim country where you can be punished just for that act. And I get a bit of a chill just imagining what that must have been like for you, Paul.
I think we were all brought to tears. It brought us back to, remembrances of the good days when we were back home. This whole little ceremony we had, little service we had, lasted no more than 10 minutes. We didn't want to, risk what we had because I knew that I still had more than half my sentence to go. I missed my family, I missed my friends, I missed all the pageantry and fun of Christmas. And I was just sitting there on a concrete floor with my blankets and a couple of good friends. And we were just half a world away from our reality,
I'm Dick Gordon. You're listening to The Story. I'm talking with Paul Sissery. In 1998, Paul was sentenced to 4 years in prison in Abu Dhabi for drug offenses. He wound up serving 3 years. Yet somehow he found ways to celebrate Christmas during the time of his incarceration, despite all the dangers involved for him and those who helped him. So far, we've heard Paul talk about 2 Christmases in prison. The next was his last, and perhaps most memorable one.
By that time, I'd been with the same people for over a year in the block. And it was well known that we were Christian because on the ID card that we were given, they record your religion. Because once a week, the guards come in the block to round up all the Muslims because they are forced to go to an Islamic lecture at least once a week. Mm-hmm. And what was really sad was most of these people did not want to go to these lectures. And they were beaten with canes until they agreed to go to these lectures. They would hide. They would do whatever they could to get out of going. But this foreman had a lot of respect for me. And this one Christmas, I approached him. I said, we really want to have a Christmas celebration again. And it coincided with Ramadan that year. And in Ramadan, people fast all day. And then after the sunset prayer, they break their fast and they eat at night. And so everybody can eat at the same time. The food is actually brought to the blocks during that holy month. The rest of the year we have to go to the cafeteria to eat. And we got some fruit and we got dates, which was kind of nice to break our fast. So that last Christmas, we got together and sang some more songs. And this time we got a little bit more lively. We sang Go Tell It on the Mountain, a great Negro spiritual, one of my favorites.
Go tell it on the mountain, go tell it over the hills and everywhere. Go tell it on the mountain that Jesus Christ is born. I said, go tell it.
And we read the Bible verse again, and then we shared what our Christmases were like at home. And some of the Muslims said, we want to sit in with you and watch what you do and see how you practice your faith. And many of them sat in the room with us. And at the end, they said, we have a surprise for you. And they'd created a tray of fruit that they had saved of their own that they'd cut up. And they said, we want to share this with you guys. And it was really an emotional moment for them to do this. They were giving up something that they needed, their bodies needed, to give to us. And it was a sacrifice on their part to do that. And it was, I guess, a way for them to give back and just to share, to show that, under the sun, we're brothers.
So what do you do now? When you celebrate Christmas, what do you do now to remember that time, those Christmases you spent in prison?
When it comes time, around Christmas time, I can't help but thinking about those people back there. I've tried to contact them. My letters do not get through. Everything is censored. Letters that they may have tried to send to me haven't gotten through. I pray for them. Christmas has a wonderful meaning to me, but as strong as that was, now my Christmases are that more important because I reflect every year back upon those 3 Christmases I spent in that prison and under what trying conditions those were. And I think there was a guiding hand that was leading me because the day I got my sentence, I got the minimum sentence of 4 years. And when I could have gotten 7 to 20 years. And both the embassy and my lawyer, who, by the way, had never asked me once what happened, convinced me that 4 years was better than getting 0, because if I had gotten 0, it wouldn't have looked right for them to have held an American 7 months in that prison, and they would have gone for a much stiffer sentence in retrial. So I accepted the 4-year sentence, and that night, when I laid on my concrete floor on my back, I could see through the bars of the window to the sky, and there were vertical bars, then there 3 feet on the other side, there were horizontal bars, and they formed little squares against the sky. And when I lay down on my back, I just saw black sky, and I closed my eyes and just said a prayer right there, thanking God for the fact that I got the minimum sentence, and I'd so far been safe in that prison, and asked for safety throughout my stay. And that lasted no longer than a minute or two, and I opened my eyes, and in one of those little squares in the black sky was a full moon. And the night I was released from that prison, I was sitting in the back seat of the little van they take us back to the airport in. I was deported. And I just thought, I want to take one more look at that prison. And when I turned around, it's very dark in the desert, but when I turned around and saw the prison, sitting in the sky right over that prison was a full moon. And it had come like full circle. And it's just like someone saying to me, see, I told you I'd take care of you. And to this day, whenever I see a full moon, my mind goes back to that prison and those people that are there. And we don't hear about them. We just don't. When I was living in Abu Dhabi, I never even knew the prison existed. They keep it below the radar.
Well, it's a very thoughtful description you have of that time and that place. I thank you for sharing it with us.
Well, I appreciate the time.
Paul Ciceri now lives in Key West, Florida. If you want to learn a little bit more about him and his misadventures in the Middle East, you can find the links at our website at thestory.org. You can also find a link to the story of another man who just got pardoned for a similar offense in Dubai and is now back home. When I come back, I'll talk to a man who also knows something about the meaning of Christmas. He is, after all, a priest. But he didn't become one of those until his mid-60s. That's coming up. I'm Dick Gordon from American Public Media. This is The Story. I'm Dick Gordon. This is The Story. There is a piece of advice that people will give you for times of personal crisis. Don't make any rash moves, they'll say. If someone close to you dies, don't sell the house, don't move to Alaska. Don't make the kind of rash move you might regret later. This is exactly what was worrying the friends and family of George Wilkinson. George was 63. He'd just lost his wife of 38 years. Well, George Wilkinson has since convinced both friends and family that the Catholic priesthood is the life he is meant to live now. You see, George was raised, as he calls it, a cradle Catholic, baptism, First Communion, confirmation, Catholic schools, 4th grade through law school. His was a traditional, and he'll tell you, a wonderful life. He married his sweetheart, Marianne, but that almost didn't happen. You see, at a young age, both George and Marianne were thinking of a life of service to the church. Well, here's how George explains it. They went for spiritual help from a priest.
And so we decided he's a good man to go to. So we went to him and laid out what I'd call the problem. Look, we are really, really attractive to one another. At the same time, we also find the spiritual life very attractive and feel drawn to that very strongly. So we want to do God's will, but, we need a little guidance. And so he says to the two of us, well, I'll tell you what you've got to do. You've got to just totally separate. No letters, no telephone calls, no flowers. And I always found this rather humorous at a later time. He looked at me and said, and no accidentally meeting on the street. And so what in the world could he have meant by that? And so we separated, meaning we no longer dated.
Would you see each other in church?
No. She went to a church in Northwest Washington, and I went to a church in
when you separated, you really did. You didn't see her at all.
No, not at all. Unknown to me, and we never met. My wife, on her way home from a bank in downtown Washington, would drop by the same basilica, go to the same Blessed Lady's shrine, and pray to her, hey, how about give me an inside track on this? What are we going to do? So the Blessed Mother must have really thought that was pretty humorous.
I was going to say, I bet she was having a good laugh about the two of you.
Yeah, right.
Well, how long did the separation last?
Well, I think, let's see, that was probably in March, probably about July. I said, to heck with this, I'm getting married. And so her birthday was August the 4th, so I sent her a dozen roses with a little note. I didn't call her, but I did put a little note that I'd like to take you to church on Sunday. And so we met. This is like a first date almost, It was just, we're both a little standoffish. And so my dad had allowed me to borrow his car and to keep it for the day because I figured this is going to be a long haul. I know what I want to do, and I've made up my mind. And so we were driving. I don't know where we were going, just kind of driving around and talking. And And we crossed Memorial Bridge, and she broke into tears and said, I just don't know. I don't know what I should be doing. And in my best legal argument for my whole life, I said, I'll tell you what you're going to do. You're going to marry me. And so she did.
I bet you kept on crying.
Yeah. That was after we got married.
That's a great story. George and Marianne raised a family together. The kids grew and went on to college and left home. And then suddenly Marianne died. It was devastating for George. And some months later that same year, he was on a spiritual retreat trying to decide what to do.
So I'm saying the rosary, and I was asking both my Uncle James and the Blessed Lady to give me some ideas of what should I do with my life.
Well,
My wife
you'd
is
been a
gone.
lawyer for 35 years. Why switch?
Right. I don't know. I just felt a call to do something else. And one of the alternatives certainly was to continue practicing law. I certainly enjoyed the practice of law. I was a senior partner. Where else can you go? And so as a senior partner, I thought that, maybe there's something more, something that I ought to be doing that is perhaps more spiritual in nature or more giving to the community. And so I'm there saying my prayers, and boom, it's like St. Paul being knocked on his rear end off the horse.
Now,
And
Father George, you were how old at that time?
probably about 62.
And
Maybe I was even 63.
Was there a part of you thinking, I've got 20, 30 years to do something different? Or were you thinking, I got to do something, if I'm going to change, I better do it quickly?
My mother was still living at that time. She finally died at 96. My father died when he was about 84. So I
Right.
figured, look, I'm good at least until 80, if they'll tolerate me. What can I do? And will they tolerate me? I soon found out that 63 was way above the age limit for an order priest. So
He did eventually get into a program called John the 23rd. The church needs new priests, and different programs have sprung up to accommodate their training. Once he started the process, George found that it had been a long time since he'd attended school.
clearly I was the oldest in my class. They joked several times about how were the hotel accommodations at the Council of Trent, which was in the 1500s. No, it was all good-natured.
Yeah.
It was all...
So the process to get in, though, once they decided to entertain you, was it fairly simple, or was it pretty rigorous, what they put you through?
It was a very lengthy process. I was told by the rector of John the 23rd to get in contact with the priest that you went to for vocations. And Mark Brennan sat me down and interviewed me for about 4 hours straight, most extensive interview I've ever had in my life, just starting from as early as I could remember and running right up to the present day. I mean, he just wanted to know everything about everything. And
were these spiritual questions?
These...
Was he testing your commitment or your spirituality? Was he just trying to get as complete a picture of George Wilkinson as he could get?
I think that's exactly right.
Yeah.
He just needed a complete picture before he even could do anything more. He wanted to have as much information as possible to determine, are we even interested in pursuing this matter additionally? Again, being 63 and the cutoff age for the Archdiocese of Washington, as well as most archdioceses or dioceses in the United States, is 50 years of age. That's the time period. If they can work with you, they want to have some years in which you're going to give them a payback. For,
I was going to say, there's a practical side to this. If they're going to invest in you, what are they going to get back?
Very absolute pragmatic side to it. Absolutely.
I wonder if the return to school was difficult for you.
Oh, my goodness, yes. Yes, it really was. Very difficult. I hadn't been in school, formal school. You take a week of additional legal education or something like that, but to go back to, I didn't type, for example, and that was all the papers in the seminary had to be typed. My wife had typed for me from the time she was in high school.
So did you learn to type or find someone else who would do it for you?
Well, I talked to a computer friend of mine who built computers, one of my clients, and he built a computer for me that with an IBM program allowed me to speak into a microphone, and then the words would appear on the monitor. Mm-hmm. Long story short, I finally found out just two-fingered peck, and that was as good as speaking it, and was certainly more accurate. But I learned a lot.
How many years of seminary?
4 years.
Did you doubt yourself at all in those 4 years? Think, what am I doing?
didn't doubt what I was doing, but I certainly did have doubts as to whether God had me in the right place.
You're listening to The Story. I'm Dick Gordon. You see, 10 years ago, George Wilkinson lost his wife, and at that time, at the age of 63, he decided that he wanted to enter the seminary to become a Catholic priest. It was not an easy time for his family or his friends or even his spiritual advisors. The question was this: was George considering the priesthood because he wanted a safe refuge, or was he doing it to serve other people? Well, I asked him that myself.
I think a little bit of both. Before my wife died, we talked about what would I do. She said, why don't you think seriously about getting remarried? You're still a young guy, and at least for our respective ages, we felt I was young. But that did not really spark a great deal of interest. When you've lived with somebody, I'm talking about if you really are in love, if you have really had a great marriage, despite the difficulties in every marriage, the tensions that exist, the hurts that arise. When you really love one another, when my wife died, it was more than half of me that just shriveled right up. And so I wasn't really looking to get remarried. And so I'm thinking, what can I do with my life? Mm-hmm. So that kind of pushed me in the direction of the priesthood, particularly after that experience saying the rosary at Loyola Retreat
But do you
House.
think a part of it was a refuge for you, if, as you, to use your words, half of you had gone with the death of your wife? Was a turn to the church more like a turn to the monastery rather than a turn to priesthood?
Negative. I would think that once I had thought about it, I thought, if this works, that's exactly what I should be doing. I should be spending the rest of my life trying to serve God's people in this very, very special way. I thought this was definitely the way to go, and if they rejected me out of hand, okay, I'd made the effort, and that's as much as I could ask for.
Did you ever ask yourself what Marianne would think of this second career of yours?
Oh, I think she was right there cheering me on.
Do you speak to your wife in prayer?
I absolutely do. Absolutely. More in conversation than any kind of formal prayer. Yeah, Marianne, for crying out loud, give me a hand in this. One of the kids has this kind of a problem. What in the world should we be doing about this? And I need your help on this.
And there were also the children, Marianne and George's own children. All of them.
12 children. 12 in a little bit less than 16 years.
12 children.
Yeah, really blessed. All of them normal, all of them right number of fingers and ears. And fortunately, I had adequate income to put shoes on feet and food on the table.
Father George, I have 2 daughters, and I get them mixed up. How do you keep 12 kids straight? I mean, do you remember all their names?
Well, I can remember their names easily enough, but who's misbehaving when they were growing up in the house was something else again. So I just would start at the top and work my way down. And eventually the one that was guilty would say, "Yes, sir."
So start at the top and take me through the list. What are the names?
Okay, Anne is our oldest. She was conceived and was born while we were in the service up at Fort Devens in Massachusetts. Jean came along. She's born in 60 in March. And then Tom, our first boy. Then Kathleen, Rose, Bernadette, and then a lot of boys at the end. George the Third, James Thomas, and then Rebecca, and then John, Daniel, and Megan is the caboose.
George Wilkinson thinks that having so many children definitely made him a better priest, but he also needed his kids' permission to simply become a priest. When he was talking about the possibility of going to the seminary, those in command of the program were clear that he needed to get a green light from his kids.
One of the questions he said, either the first or second time I met with him, "Have you told your children?" I said, "Heck no. I'm not going to tell them until I find out whether the cardinal or the archbishop is going to sponsor me." He said, "Oh, no. I can see from my interviews with you how close-knit your family is. I want either a letter or a telephone call from every one of those children saying what they think about your going in the seminary."
All 12 of them?
All 12 of them.
Wow.
And so some of them wrote letters, and some of them called him, and some of them wouldn't respond. They were that upset about it. The older girls, in particular, who had children, seemed to project the idea, look, you'll go into the seminary and these big iron gates will close behind you, and we've lost not only our mother, but we've lost our father, and our kids will never know their grandfather. But John the 23rd Seminary is not like that. I had a telephone in my room. They could call me anytime they wanted to. If they came to the Boston area and wanted to visit, they could come. We could go to meals together. We could leave the seminary and have a meal outside. It was a whole different atmosphere than bringing young men along in a seminary-type environment where they are making they're still exploring. They're still exploring the possibility of being a priest, but they don't have that broad background experience that the fellows that I was with at John the 23rd did have.
But still your children now share you with a larger group of people.
They do, and they are happy because I'm so happy. The one major drawback is not being able to spend enough time with my grandchildren. I had earlier this spring an opportunity to take off 9 days, so I flew to San Francisco, stayed with my son and his wife for 2 days, went across to Sausalito and spent 2 days with our youngest child, Megan, flew from there down to Pasadena and spent 2 days with my daughter there and her husband and their 2 children, and flew from there to Tucson for 2 days, and then back so that I was back by late Friday night and able to pick up the slack and begin celebrating.
You have to preach a sermon on that Sunday.
Of course I did. Of course I did. When I was in Pasadena, my third grader, we were crossing a street, put her hand in mine, and I told, as a part of my homily for that Sunday, how great that was, just to have that little hand in mine. And I missed that. I missed that, them climbing up into a chair and my reading a book to them. You know, for the older grandchildren, I take them to Starbucks or someplace like that, and we can have a coffee. And I get a little nervous when some of these college-age guys start looking at my granddaughters, and I think, why in the heck don't you get your own girlfriend? These are mine.
One more personal question. You had this wonderful life with your wife, Marianne. You shared a life and a bed with that woman for 40 years, and it's nice to hear you talk about it with the warmth that you do. Did you decide shortly after her death that you would never be attracted to another woman? I know, men who are 75, 80 years old who fall in love all over again, and having experienced the beauty of that kind of love that you did, do you not worry that it might happen again and that would challenge your commitment to the church?
I have probably no doubts at all that I could easily fall in love with. I mean, women are God's beautiful creatures. I mean, just the way they move is a delight to see. Would I ever fall in love so much as to be tempted to leave the priesthood? I say with some trepidation in my own ability to withstand temptation that probably the answer is no, I would not ever leave the priesthood. But I think I might be tempted enough that I would say to my Archbishop, look, I've got to leave wherever I am, and I've got to leave Holy Redeemer. I really, for my benefit and the benefit of others, I really need to leave this parish. So far that hasn't happened, but priests are men, and women are just delightful creatures to be around, and it's a great blessing to have them, particularly now that the church has opened up so many avenues for women who are knowledgeable to participate in the life of the church. What a great perspective they bring.
Well, Father George, it's been a delight having you on the program. Thanks for your time.
Well, thank you very much. It was a delight to talk to you, and I hope I didn't talk your ear off.
George Wilkinson is the pastor at the Holy Redeemer Church in College Park, Maryland. George's story was suggested by his daughter Anne. She wrote to me and said, I have a story for you. And I think you'll agree his is a great story. And so this is my chance to say we depend on you for these kinds of ideas and insights into the stories and the people that you know and I don't. So if you're sitting around the holiday table, have a listen to those who swap tales, and send me a note or leave me a message at thestory.org. Our telephone number is 1-888-966-9862. I'm Dick Gordon. This is The Story.
The Story is a production of North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC, a broadcast service of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill.
American Public Media